All right, welcome back to Bookwave, the book club podcast. Today's our second video on the Bible. We're looking at Exodus today. I'm your host, Scott, joined by Matt and Will. And my first question to both of you and to anyone listening, drop a comment down below or visit our website at bookwave.club. My first question is, what do you think of the effect Jordan Peterson is having on people, in contrast to the people who want to leave the Bible behind, like the Jews left behind Israel, or left behind Egypt, sorry.
Repeat the first part of that.
Oh yeah, what do you think of the effect Jordan Peterson is having on people, like, for example, with his Genesis lectures? Because a lot of people are listening to what Jordan Peterson has to say, and they think not only does the Bible have value to them now in this new perspective, but they're becoming Christians and joining churches. So what do you think of that in contrast to the people like listening to Sam Harris, who would say, get rid of it all. You don't need the Bible. It's part of the past. Wherein Jordan Peterson is just saying, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. But people are taking that and saying, well, time to become a Christian.
So I boil it down to, this is from Carl Jung, but I want to get away from the jargon because it's difficult for me not to be pretentious, as you know, because I never think about what I'm going to say, so that I just use the words that come to mind, and usually those are the words I've read. So it's a pattern recognition problem. But I think what Peterson has done is, and this we kind of touched on this, Will, in our last video, I think. I don't know your opinion, but he has given us a process of individuation that is sufficiently painful and sufficiently hard that realistically, most people will say no, turn up their noses, walk away, and live out a nihilist path. And then those who get through the narrow way, they're going to be the ones who succeed. Now, that's not fair, and who knows what the hidden variables are, but at least he's articulated a rite of passage. And it seems credible, but also incredible, and that's an important ratio because he constantly harps. These are biblical stories. I'm only looking at it from a psychological lens. I want to claim that's just him making a space. It doesn't matter that he used the word psychology. In the same way that Harris looks at everything through a cognitive lens, that doesn't matter. He's just making a space. What matters for Peterson is he says you don't know until you try. You don't know if these biblical stories have any relation to your life until you wake up to the fact that they do and act as if. And that's the existential deal. Like, these people, they thought they knew God in Egypt, but he was one amongst all the other polytheistic entities, anthropomorphized with hawks and snakes and rivers and the pharaoh and brick. Nowadays, computers, cosplayers.
Yeah, we're talking about Exodus today. We're talking about Exodus today. You can mention the molten calf while you're at it.
Yeah, made from the gold that they ripped out of their neighbor's ear. And the thing that happened to them was the one entity that would not be anthropomorphized, that would not rub shoulders with, that was jealous and arbitrary and not to be played with. And I don't know if I can be friends with, because he's not being nice and he's not being gratuitous at all. He's making demands and arbitrarily selecting heroes without credentials. He picked a random farmer, Moses, and he had a speech impediment, and he said, you're going to do all these wonderful things, but not you, me through you, because I'm arbitrary. And he led these people out. So, in conclusion, I think Peterson does something similar, where he just arbitrarily plucks from the Bible, arbitrarily imposes evolutionary biological structure or paradigm, and then just says, deal with all this pastiche, because a lot of people critique him for not being coherent. He just says, as a challenge, deal with all this arbitrariness of my philosophical musings and my ramblings, and do something about it. And I think men respond to that because they're like, it's hard enough that I could either just listen to them all and make like affinity groups in a Reddit forum about it, or I could clean my own damn room. Who knows which is better? Who knows who actually has the last laugh? Who knows who's actually being ironic? You don't know until you try, and that's the existential proposition. Can we be our own tribe? You don't know until you leave Egypt.
So let me weigh in on this, because that's a big wall of words, and I'm digesting it one brick at a time. But because here's the thing, I haven't listened to Jordan Peterson's Genesis lectures, so I haven't been impacted by them. I've listened to a lot of Jordan Peterson's talks, and I know that we all have a bias, so this question is already set up leaning in one direction. But I like the idea of exposure because he's got a platform, and the fact of the matter is the Christian faith is getting harped on, and it's probably been harped on for its entire existence, but at a time when it's so easy to communicate with everybody on the planet who has an internet connection, which is billions, it's important to actually respect things. And I know for me, especially growing up on the internet, like in the early days on 4chan, respect was not involved in the motto of the internet. This wasn't an area to encourage people. And I think after 20 years of just crazy crap going on the internet, we're getting to a place now where there's parties and there's groups of people and they have voices and they're established communities that we see in the world. And Christianity for sure is one of them. I don't think they have like a really good internet following, but it's very easy to find people being Christian or hating Christians. And we don't have a lot of stuff in the middle where it's just don't be Christian, don't hate Christian. Read words that are really old that resemble sentences and experiences that are all around you in this culture today that you're not even aware of. Like in Exodus, for example, I think Moses' son, Gershom, is a stranger in a strange land. Maybe I've got the parental line mixed up, but the name means a stranger in a strange land. Well, I just read that book 3 months ago, and I didn't know that was a line straight out of the Old Testament. And it's just like you have all of this stuff and content, and it's everywhere. It's ingrained in our society. It's built into the fabric of our existence, and you can't just discredit it all. So much has been done for different flags of these regions and these groups of ethnicities and spirituality and what have you, and to just say, oh, we don't need to look at that in order to come up with what's next. Like it's like when I talk with my wife about chopping down trees. I am not a muscular guy, and I don't know how to chop down a tree. And I'll probably not be the guy that chops down the tree, because there are schools of people who chop down trees. And they've been studying the people who chop down trees for thousands of years. They have an oral tradition and a written tradition on how to chop down trees. So to go out and try and redo things and have spiritual journeys without looking at the templates and the frameworks that exist in our culture is just short-sighted and ignorant. Mic drop.
I had a similar experience in Genesis when it was going through the Cain and Abel story, and it said something like, whoever shall slay Cain shall be avenged sevenfold, or something like that. I'm just like, avenged sevenfold? I saw them live.
Yeah. And so, yeah, like, if you can get people to experience old content before pretending to make new content, I think that has the most benefit, because the wheels have been made, and there's nothing worse than going out and thinking you have a new thought, and a Buddhist monk had it 15 times 15,000 years ago.
That's amazing, especially when you consider the branch in which the monk is sitting on, and how quick we are to saw off the branch that we are sitting on. So, for example, my guide is Soren Kierkegaard, and I think the word existentialism So to go at this sense of, all right, if I'm going to go out and chop down the tree, I am going to go out and chop down the tree. Or what is an existential equivalent, I am going to pick up the phone and make the call to the contractor and verbally interact with this imposing cadre of experts that look at me as this string bean know nothing with respect to their entire profession. So of course they're going to take full advantage of me on price, or these are my thoughts until I've interacted with their reality. So in a real way, picking up that phone is existentially equivalent. I feel it in my guts the same way as picking up the hatchet would be. It's an equal danger to my mental health, a popular phrase. But it needs to be done. Reality will not be ignored. And where I was coming from this is like German higher criticism. And generally speaking, with broad brushstrokes, the Enlightenment period, I think kind of gave us a mind virus, an earworm of, well, we can abstract from that. We can step back and all, see reason for what it is. We don't have to get all emotional. We don't have to listen to our gut. Our gut's 99.9% of the time wrong. We can just decide to choose the good. Well, that doesn't solve the problem of the trees, and it doesn't solve the problem of the professional who hasn't been called yet. It doesn't wheel the person on the wheelchair home. It doesn't make me a better person when I look in the mirror. It doesn't solve inadequacies at all. And so what would it look like to take up the problem of problems? The problem of there being problems. Does it mean having a higher point of view that you can escape to? Or does it look like something else? And obviously, I think we're in agreement, Will. Maybe we're not. I know we are, because of that metaphor you gave, that the answer is not to be found in some escape to a higher criticism. But this throws into question the validity and stability of systems. Like, one thing Sam Harris doesn't do is he doesn't give you a system. He gives you arguments against easy believism. Well, that's superstition. Here's why. But he doesn't give you a system, and I applaud him for that, because a system would just be another form of superstition. But how do we tackle this problem of problems without recourse to easy systems?
Well, let me just jump in there right now, because one thing that you're saying is Sam Harris doesn't give you a system. But I think that in absence of delivering a system, you have observation, right? Monkey see, monkey do. And so if you're saying that you're going to make videos or podcasts, and what you're going to do is you're going to criticize other people's beliefs and superstitions, and that's your primary drive, let's say, well, that's a thing that you're doing, and anybody can find the tools to reproduce that. And so now, like, I'll bring up Steven Crowder. Steven Crowder's an intelligent man. The problem with Steven Crowder is that the population isn't filled with Steven Crowders. And so when you go and you make a cool thing like Change My Mind, and you engage a few people in a few regions in good conversation and debate, that's one thing. And the platform and the exposure of those conversations are great. But when you have millions of people now going out and saying, oh, change my mind on this thing, change my mind on that thing, but they're not following your system because you didn't publish your system, because you're not trying to teach them how to critique people and debate with people, you're trying to expose people to debate. It's two different things. And you have that issue of people imitating what you're doing without having the tools to do it. And that gets into this weird problem where now you have people who are trying to influence people and be popular just for being popular, and it leaves you looking for a good way to live, a right way to live, and jumping on whatever wagon comes by, whether that's Al-Qaeda or Kardashian.
You hit the nail on the head, or should I say the thumb with the hammer.
I think Sam has his own genuine like mission statement though. Like he thinks he's saving the world. Like he genuinely sees religion for the most part as a mind virus, like you said, Matt. And that's the problem right there, and that's what C.S. Lewis talks a lot about in The Abolition of Man, which I just read this week. He talks about like the Tao, but he incorporates like the law from the Bible and the Stoic teachings and like any kind of ancient philosophy like that. He encompasses them all together as the Tao in his book. And he's just like, if you want to change the Tao, then you have to work within it to evolve it. You can't just attack it from the outside. You can't just try to debunk everything. You have to say, okay, this is what the Tao is. Can we build on that without contradicting anything? No, you probably can't, so just stick with it. So that's part of his like apologetics work.
So I think the idea of the virus has mileage, and this is why what does a virus do? It replicates itself. So to your point, if all someone offers in a compressed way is a set of gestures, then all you can do to interact deeply with that personality or product or space is to imitate those gestures, which makes you a mirror neuron.
Yes.
In a system, it doesn't make you the human being facing a system with the attendant emotional response that faces give systems. Like when the computer shuts down, it's like, oh. When someone says, "Would you marry me?" Oh. You know, there's a lot in that metaphor of the facing. And faces face systems. A virus doesn't have a face. Very critical. A virus has a set of gestures that it will die because it has no essence unless it replicates itself across vast stretches of surface. Now, jokes are great at imitating the structure of a virus. That's why jokes are always short-lived. Jokes do not last for thousands of years. Narratives do, because narratives are not viruses. They're not memes in the...
I was waiting for you to say that word, meme.
Yeah, in the present connotation.
Yeah, they're not memes in the... what's his name?
The
biologist? Thank
Richard
you. In the
Dawkins
Dawkinian sense. Yeah. They're structures, a la narrative, all right, that we can face and literally put masks on in a mystery play. So there's this guy before Soren Kierkegaard.
Bless your soul.
But thank you.
I was just saying bless you.
Yeah.
Hold on, before you go farther from the virus point, because I really like this metaphor, and I don't know how much time we need to spend on it, but because it sounds to me like you guys are talking about this virus term as this bacterial infection virus thing, but I like it as this idea as a programmatical virus. Because if you look at a programmatical virus, what does it do? It infects as many bodies and hosts as it can and delivers information back to the source.
Well, that's what Richard Dawkins said religion was. Like that kind of meme.
So now, viruses, you can exterminate them. You can get good antivirus software like skepticism and so on. Now, you can completely eradicate a virus from planet Earth. But, in fact, it's dormant in a hard drive somewhere in someone's house. Well, the Bible is the hard drive, right? And now we actually have the hard drive is everywhere. And you have access to this virus, because viruses aren't necessarily bad. You can make a virus that kills viruses. Viruses are things that do stuff and generally are quite invasive, and you usually don't want viruses on your computer, and I don't advocate to disable your antivirus system. But if you look at it from a holistic point of view, it's just programming, and we're already infected with viruses and programming, and we call them anxiety, anger, depression, sadness, fear, hurt, guilt, remorse. All of these things are running all of the time. the Bible and all of that metaphor of the virus offers different strategies. If you open up a New Testament, like the ones they hand out in schools, there is a section, an index, that says if you're feeling sad, read these sections, and it gives you the tools to address the other viruses, and it's attempting to be an operating system beyond antivirus software, beyond viruses. It's trying to be the whole enchilada.
Let's move in this direction, because I think this is going to spin us interestingly toward and from the Exodus account. But one quick thing I want to note as an example, as a reinforcement of your point, Will, of this programmatic nature of the virus and how that relates to heuristics, thought patterns and pattern detection, and also learning to pattern detect and see things in a zoomed out holistic manner. Like all these things, like we wouldn't know how to think holistically without the micro disturbances known as virus. So they're bad, but they also teach us how to see. So there's a gift in that curse. But one thing I want to point out is, notice when Scott sneezed, you said bless you. That bless you is a function operating parasitically on his sneeze. And now he thinks, oh, sneeze is something like I was doing something wrong, or it came out, and thank God my heart didn't stop. You said bless you, which means now I have an interpretation schema for why my heart didn't stop, because God blessed me to live again. Like that's part of the origin of bless you after people sneeze. They thought your heart might stop. Now, I don't believe that's scientifically accurate for 1 second, but it does manifest this asymptotic relationship between a blessing and something as trivial as sneezing, does manifest this viral activity that a blessing, just saying reflexively, has attached itself to the motor output of the sneeze. We see that all the time in customs.
Yeah, like we have the calendar that we use today because of Christianity.
Yeah, this programmatic way of understanding something that we cannot see, touch, taste, or feel, namely the passage of time. We've, for one reason or another, assimilated it to metronome. We've assimilated it to tidal patterns. We've looked at the moon. We've done other things, and we will continue to do things to program responses to things we can't touch, taste, see, or feel.
That's the thing,
and so
right?
virus is kind of a heuristic way of understanding the concrete's relation to the abstract.
I don't really believe that there was anyone on Earth alive at a point in time where they aged enough to be able to be fully cognizant of the sun setting and simultaneously still fearing it. But I'd like to believe that there was a group of people on the planet at one point in history when the sun set every single night, they were scared out of their minds because they had no idea what was going on. They hadn't come up with that tool yet. And they hadn't established the fact that this is what the sun does every day. And so when our brains look at things, they delete, they distort, and they generalize. And for time and the passing of the seasons, our generalization is the calendar. And that tool slid into that platform very easily. And you teach it in primary school because it's one of those things that you need to know right away because this is happening every day of your life. And the notion of the calendar is baffling.
Yeah, and to that point, when the nights started getting longer, they were like, is it going to keep going like this? Is it going to, the day's going to keep getting shorter? Where's the sun going? Is it just going to be like a minute every day and then eventually nothing? And then they realized that it kind of fluctuates in and out.
Back to your point, Matt, about problems and the problem of problems, I think there's a problem believing there's a problem of problems because for me, problems and the interpretation of them can be very damaging, but they can also be the only reason you exist. And if you get your life to the right spot and allow yourself to say that things that aren't actually big deals are the problems that you address throughout your day, your entire purpose is addressing problems day in, day out. And without problems, you'd feel very purposeless, because you'd just be like, you'd run out of Earl Grey tea and newspaper. It would just, it would get old quick. And that's why we have hobbies, or at least we hope to have hobbies or friends or activities. But one of the big problems we have right now is, and I think that's why the talks that Jordan Peterson does are so important, is because it's content that has substance. But right now we're in an age where you can subscribe to 5 different TV sources, and you can lose 168 hours very quickly. And from there, it is not a big step to go 7 years.
Absolutely. And I like what you did there in terms of bringing the future into a definition of how we pay attention. So what do we pay attention with? Well, with whatever time is. And time seems to be something of a consciousness of the change from present state to some instability. And then the interval of being in that instability, and not just being in it, but causing it, being caused by it, and selecting from a suite of options constitutes what moving into the future feels like, looks like, tastes like. And we spin out a lot of narrative systems to try to capture that as it goes across different people's experience of their own problems. And I think that's at a very high resolution, that's one of the things the hero myth accomplishes, is it gives us a sense of what it's like to live into the future. But it doesn't, to your point, exhaust whatever time is, because it's just one crystallization of an operating, or of a code, of a certain way of executing programs, of getting up in the morning, for example, of going to sleep at night at a reasonable hour, for example, of getting a career, which is kind of a longitudinal program of series of executions, staying in that career, being promoted, being a good husband, being a good wife, being a good single person, blah, 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 blah. And then the meta of that, being a good person, which things become very, very vague at that point, because it's hard to see that forest. It's easier to see the trees of career, single relationship. Now, to go back to the original question that Scott asked, I think I would then reframe one of the things that Peterson has accomplished is he's given us some sense of those programmatic assumptions in our lives, and how we can't escape the fact that we're nested in these structures. And to become more aware of that gives us agency that doesn't require us to be members of an identity group that in the past has a certain problem that now identifies themselves and gives them something to do moving into the future. Like, I was part of an oppressed group. That's what I am, and that's my liturgy for how I'm going to solve problems in the future. I'm going to become an advocate. Like, that's one way of going about how to wake up in the morning and go to bed at a reasonable hour and do career and do relationships. But it's very small in comparison to what you could do to execute your programs. And I think he was trying to suggest that with, for example, looking at Cain and Abel. Here you get agency, what to do, proper sacrifice, without looking at a people group and historical interpretations of what oppression is.
Interesting to consider as well, because I think a bigger problem than the problem of problems, and I just love saying that sentence, so I'm going to try and say it as much as I can. More so than the problem of problems, the problem I find to be most problematic is the problem of no problems. Probably. And I think that as soon as you drive, for example, in Ontario, 2 hours north of Toronto, and you walk out into a field, and you stand there in this field 50 kilometers from the nearest gas station. There's a convenience store within 5 kilometers, but it's just a convenience store. And night is coming. And it's the middle of summer, so it's warm out. That's okay. But if it rains, you're going to get wet because you're in a field. And if it gets dark, you're not going to be able to see because you don't have power. And after a few days, you're going to start getting dirty. And if you don't have fresh fruit and vegetables and meat and carbs, you're going to get all sorts of diseases. And now we're at this place in North America where you don't even have to think about that. You turn the light switch on, you turn the tap on, you get your water, you get your light. But I think that as we sit in this isolation 6 weeks deep now, and we stare at our bank accounts as the weeks go by, and we realize we only have to buy gas once a month when we're not leaving to go to work every day to pay the bills that are being covered because of the CERB here in Canada. We're getting the $2,000 a month. And now we're looking at our bills and we're saying, well, why was gas 3 times as much as it is right now? Why was I paying twice as much for electricity for a specific 8 hours of the day when now I can do laundry 24 hours a day, 7 days a week and not fear the peak electricity hours? And there's all these things that are going on that we have the space to breathe. And that's what the pandemic does. It gives us the space, like you're saying, to realize that there's all these things that are problems that are being dealt with through money and government that we could change and we have actually control over, and wildlife is coming back this quickly. We're seeing changes in the environment, and it's only been a month and a half. And there's just so much to consider. And when you turn off your sensors and you don't listen to the news and you refuse to have conversations and tune in and you just coast on your 9 to 5 and your 6-pack a night, it's scary. That's the scariest thing in the world to me.
Yeah.
Because when you talk about at the end there, the coasting and having a routine that can be automatized. All right, 8, 5, go home, crack 6-pack, press remote button, see the talking head, go to sleep. That is precisely what can be predicted, and therefore bought at a specific price that doesn't change. You've sold your soul.
And the ancient version of this scenario.
That's what it means to sell your soul.
The ancient version of this scenario is the Jews being stuck in a slump in Egypt and just needing to make the decision to change it, hit the reset button, get out of there.
And notice, yeah, their task was hard labor, but they were in a high-rise slump. This was the cradle of civilization. But it was an artificial one, to Will's point. Everything there was artificially erected and artificially told. I mean, what were these sphinxes made of? A bunch of artificial agglomerations of things that you never see in nature. And because you don't see it anywhere else, it feels real here, but it's only because it's so artificial.
Now, so here's my question for you, because I love the parallel you've given us, Scott, between coasting now and then stopping coasting in Egypt and getting the hell out. And I understand that one of the driving factors was quite literally verbatim God telling Moses to tell the Pharaoh to let my people go. And it's just an aside, couldn't believe that was literally the wording, because I feel like I've heard that in song.
Let my people go.
So that was fun. Every time I read it. So yeah, God was telling them to get the heck out. But how do you get a people to get the heck out and take control? Because realistically, they still didn't take control. Moses disappeared up that mountain for 40 days, and before he got back, they were melting their gold into a molten calf. And at every turning point, where's the water? Where's the food? Where's the bread? And the answers were there, sure. But that's one man delivering one existential, omnipotent force's plan for perfect execution of existence. And that we do not have that right now. We don't have someone telling us that. And does it benefit them? 2,000 years out, was it worth leaving Egypt? Probably.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Did it get us anywhere? Did we establish the utopia? Did the land of milk and honey come to fruition? Because it just seems like there's been a lot of conflict. And I don't know how you get a group of people that don't want to do more than what they're already doing actually look inward.
Yeah, and when you look at the first two books of the Bible that we've read so far, just Genesis and Exodus, I can't find too many monotheists in there, like dedicated ones. Like, it seems to imply at multiple points that they're dealing with multiple gods. And Isaac Asimov makes the point that the Judites were the only tribe of Israel to actually adopt monotheism properly, because the documents that we get the Old Testament from are the E document and the J document and the P document, he calls them. And there's like hold on. Yeah, the J document is from like the south, and it's the one that refers to Jehovah. And so that's why it's called the J document, because it talks about Jehovah and Judah. And the E document uses the language Elohim, which is plural, and it comes from the Ephraim tribe, which is one of the sons of Joseph. So it's like, these are the only two copies that we have of these stories that they eventually mesh together. And the P document is like another priestly, polished document that they put together a few hundred years after they found both of those. So like when it looks at the two different accounts of Genesis, and one talks about multiple gods and the other one doesn't, and then eventually goes on to talk about the abolition of multiple gods, it really shows a struggle there for, just getting rid of polytheism. Didn't go as quickly as God said so, now do it.
No, it was a fight, and it seems like God was fighting this fight through Moses in Exodus, where he was actually having to deal with the fact that I am a jealous God, and I am the one God, and all those other gods are inadequate compared to me, and forget about them. And if you find anyone worshiping them, kill them.
That's the other thing. He never says I am the only God. He's just like, those other guys, they ain't the real deal. They ain't as cool as me. You should only worship me. Forget those guys.
If they have images or idols or worship of other gods, destroy them, burn them, kill them, get rid of them. But if you come across a stranger, don't do him any harm.
And when you sow your fields and reap your grain, leave a little in the corners for anyone who would pass by, regardless of their ideology or philosophy. Theism.
So there's some confliction in those commandments, those rules, and that's where a lot of my hang-up starts with the Old Testament, because there's a lot of great verses that say, be good to foreigners, be good to strangers, do no harm against any man. And then there's a lot of stuff about killing people that don't follow your God.
Yeah.
Go take the land, leave no man, woman, or child.
And specifically, like the Amalek tribe, like several hundred times is referenced that, like, these are the ones, these are the worst. We're going to go and we're going to get our land that God gave us. And it's what?
And if you read the genealogies, they're actually descended from Esau, like Jacob's brother. So
yes,
they're all descended from Abraham, and yet they're fighting. And another point that
like Esau.
yeah, another point that Asimov brings up in his chapter on Exodus is that the plagues could have been, like, there's no real evidence for the plagues happening, but if you trace the genealogies and try to time it, it might have been at about the same time that the Sea Peoples came to invade, which like ended the Bronze Age. So his theory in like the battle with the Israelites versus the Amalekites tribe is that they're fighting another tribe that was driven out of Israel in the Sinai Peninsula, and they had to fight them so they could like stay in Mount Sinai and then go to Israel. So like they were getting pushed out by the invaders, so they were forced to fight each other afterwards.
So you bring up an interesting point, because as a gamer, I'm always looking for a nice piece of armor or a good weapon. And first of all, that breastplate they make for Aaron sounds like it's got 16 gem slots, which offer mad dexterity boost. Well, depending on how you socket it, right? Obviously enchantable. So that's really cool. I'd love to know where that got to. But the other thing, which is going to get me to my question, is that rod of God that Moses gets, that he throws down, it turns into a snake, eats other people's snake rods, and then he can pick it back up, it turns into a rod, points it at an ocean, can split the ocean, turn every river and body of water in wood or in stone in all of Egypt into blood for a week.
Sounds like a good weapon.
Lifting it up in the air makes his tribe win wars. Like, this thing is powerful. And so my question, always the open mind, is if this actually happened word for word how it's written here, and there was alien technology with the ability to do these things, what would go into that? How do you turn, like, scientifically, all the water into blood? I'm just going to choose one thing, right? Like, there's too much going on, but how would you do that?
Well, some people talk about iron oxide content turning the water red.
Right.
That's about the only good explanation I've heard.
So let's say iron oxide's maybe magnetic to some degree and attractable, and you've got this rod that's got a nuclear fusion cell in it, and it's got like a button, and it just sucks all this iron oxide up into the waters.
Have you been watching Ancient Aliens in preparation of these podcasts?
No, I just thought, there's people out there, they've got the conspiracies, so let's just explore it a little bit, because that'd be nice to have. That'd be a very handy rod.
It would. And there was a school of thought with the scholastics that you have the essence of things, and then you have the nominal form. And the nominal form is what nowadays we would say, oh, you're speaking my language. Like, the things you and I are saying, they may not refer to facts on the ground, aliens coming out of ships, but you're speaking my language, and whatever our words are referring to, we know that we inhabit a similar frame. So if it does land, we'll be able to recognize that elephant together. We won't be in disagreement about what we see or expect to see. And so we can make predictions together. We can have civility together. We don't need to have an accurate representation of reality to have a civilization. So perhaps it was dropped on another planet and we lost it. And this is the blueprint. And if our nuclear physics is fully funded, we could reproduce what Moses had and what Moses spent his time really doing behind all the sheep in the middle of nowhere, Area 51, so to speak.
Yeah.
Am I tracking with where you're like?
Yeah, exactly. Like, because, I mean, realistically, theoretically, with enough technology, you could make a pillar of cloud and fire. And just have that in a box. Open it up. Like, I could, like, if you showed me, if you somehow in 20 years you said, Will, I've got a time machine, we're going to go meet Moses. And he's actually like a Da Vinci type. And he's been pulling the wool over everyone's eyes and creating this new religion. And we went there, and it's like, he's got this lab, and he's got a bunch of tools, and it's all science. I'd be like, oh, okay, yeah. Good, yeah, that makes sense. I could believe that a man with enough technology could convince people of a lot of stuff in a dark age.
And even like, let's really lean into this. When this magician, scientist, eccentric outsider who was once inside comes back to the institution known as Egypt. He's tested by the magicians who are well ensconced. They produce some magic spell. They show their exhibition. And then Moses's exhibition is to dominate them. They're not real competitors in this market. Moses came prepared, and he came like a shark smelling the blood. He wasn't looking for a blue ocean, to use an entrepreneurial term. Those people settled in their monolith, in their, what do they call it? Their Facebook confidence. He came with something years ahead and made them look obsolete, literally ate them. Right? The snake ate them. And the snake is a mythological or archetypal image for transformation. So the product he brought transformed their product in such a way that their product effectively disappeared from the marketplace. But then what's interesting is Moses was tolerated by the Pharaoh at that point. He was not prized, which is a common story in academia. Those who are truly cutting edge are tolerated, but they're put in a tower far away from everyone. They're not given classes to teach. They're put with their legal pads in some highly attenuated research and development wing. But Moses didn't shut up. He went on and on about his demand.
It's interesting and that's what got me going, was the fact that it wasn't just Moses, but that there were magicians, and that they were very comfortable using the term magician. And then also later mentioned, don't ever tolerate a witch. Again, a bit of conflicting stuff going on. But yeah, the notion that there's magicians other than Moses, like, who's to say the man and the technology of Egypt, and who knows how many thousands of years they'd been hiding technology in the bottoms of temples, and Moses was privy to it because he got raised by the Pharaoh's daughter or whatever. And he had a speech impediment, so he didn't make friends with the other magicians. Maybe he was a little autistic, and maybe he fucked off for a few years. I mean, maybe he disappeared for a few years and came back. Yeah, came back with a whole bunch of stuff.
And it's interesting too with that theory. You can call it a literary interpretation or a scientific theory. In this realm that we're discussing topics, it doesn't matter. When he left and effed off his time, notice how he changed and was transformed. He went to a well, he was thirsty, and a bunch of women of them came, and he immediately helped them, served each one indiscriminately, broke his back, and they left him. Of course they were served by him. And they went to their dad, and he said, "You're home early, all of you. How'd you get all that done so quickly?" "Oh, there was this guy, he helped us all out. He was so nice." "What the hell? Why didn't you bring him home?" "Oh, it never crossed our mind." Every man knows what that's like. And that's not a jab at women. It's a reality that is told in this system, story. So we see this change in Moses. He has a speech impediment. He doesn't really pay attention at school. He's impulsive the moment he sees an Egyptian whipping these people that he now identifies with, though he has no real contact with, some historical people group that he thinks he has some bloodline ancestry.com with. He goes and kills him because he identifies with that history so closely, ironically. And then he runs off, but he transformed out in the wilderness. He understood, here are some people, they could be taken advantage of by these rough and tumble shepherds out there. I'm going to help them just because it's the right thing to do. Of course, he's not rewarded. And the father, who's like the patriarch, says, not because he's a good man, but he says, all right, if he helped you once that much, we need to bring him on board. He can labor for us. Back and get him. Nothing about romance. Nothing about finding the one. But Moses was a man, not impulsive creature. He's brought in, and then later, and it's funny how it says this in the story, the execution code for how people actually get married. It just says, out of context, in one line, "Oh yeah, and the father gave one of 7 to Moses as a wife. Exactly. Isn't it funny?
And then she had him a child.
Is what our culture does nothing but emphasize.
Yeah.
I went off a little bit on that.
No, that's the thing, because religion gives us a framework for what's important and what's not important. And when you go and you throw out the book and you're still a human, and the book was built knowing you're a human, and it's thought of everything, now you're stuck coming up with how to deal with everything that you need as a human, because there is a spiritual void inside you. And at a very young age, you start asking these questions. So when you say, none of this is going to work for me because of the way you persecuted this group of people during this period of time, well, you can do that with everything that exists, essentially. And now, like, you have the Church of Woke, and they're proselytizing other individuals, and they're trying to get you woke. And there are priests in the Church of Woke. There are figureheads at the top of the Church of Woke. And you've just gone and created a system that addresses that which you were lacking, but the way you're addressing it is by bashing the system you've gotten rid of, and you're just using that system's tools in your own system, and it's perverted. So now you've got another religion fighting another religion, and you're saying you're not religious.
To be a religion. To be a religion. Because the religion is to say we're woke from religion, but they participate in all the sacraments of a religion, and they will marry off accordingly to promulgate their religious hierarchy.
Yes, the Oedipal principle. It's like just like Oedipus when he says, the only thing I care about is I don't want a religion. Then you create a religion just by default. And it goes back to something that you said, Will, that like your brain doesn't process negatives as well as they do positives. So when you have a woke religion based on, oh, we're just not like them. They have slavery in their book. We're nothing like that, okay? We're moving on from that.
We're passing over that. That's our Passover meal.
Oh, we're not going to do that. Okay, what are you going to do? Don't tell me what you're not going to focus on, because the more you tell me what you're not focused on, is the more you focus on it.
The environmentalist says, you know what, that tree outside, Will? Don't cut it down. That's my answer.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, the tree has to fall, otherwise we're going to continue to have these animals rambunctious in our house, and irritating my wife, and it's also irritating me because it's irritating my wife, and we're gonna have kids someday. And what if there's a cougar in one of those branches,
or a snake, a really big snake?
You can't call those people in that expert group, because capitalism is evil, and they're gonna overcharge you. And this is how you protest. Okay, so I'm not gonna cut down the tree because I'm environmental, and I'm not gonna call the business owner because I'm not a capitalist. I guess you're asking me to be a martyr for your religion, because I'm not going to do anything, and that's going to make things worse, and eventually it's going to make it so worse that I don't survive.
Yeah.
I see what you're actually asking me to do subconsciously. I'm on to the game. And I think this is what Peterson's talking about when he says, either are someone who loves being and wants to preserve it, or you're not. And the not is nihilism. You don't even have to be conscious of that nihilism to be an agent of it. Some real stuff.
And I think C.S. Lewis talks about this kind of stuff too, where it's like, in the Old Testament, it says, thou shalt not kill, which is, a negative. But he says, instead of someone saying, oh, that's just a negative psychology, tells us that's not going to work. Instead, it evolves in the New Testament into, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, and love thy neighbor. And it's not just saying, hey, don't kill each other. Don't, covet your neighbor's wife. Don't treat your buddy's slaves improperly, or, you might get a little bit of punishment in the end.
I remember I was watching a cartoon 12 years ago. I don't know the cartoon. I think maybe the character was a detective, and he had a bad guy. And the bad guy was one of the cronies for the big bad guy. And the crony was very stupid. And they had a map. And they were trying to find out where the big bad crony base was. And the crony didn't know where the base was. And he said, okay, is it at the mall? And he said, no, it's not there. Because he knew where it wasn't. And so for the next period of time, he asked the crony where it wasn't. And he got through the entire town until there was one building left. And he wasn't sure if that's where the base was, but he was sure it wasn't in any of all the other buildings. And so in the end, he got the answer. That is a terrible way to find out what you should do.
Oh, every scholastic in the world now had to go outside and in the backyard bury their via negativa, their way of the negative after you said that. Thank you, Will. I'm being facetious, but it's a good point. It's a good point. I really like what you said, Scott, too, in terms of a way of contrasting the understanding of the letter of the law as thou shalt not with the spirit of the law in the new wineskin. Okay, if thou shalt not, what shall I do positively? Maybe I need to go and ask my neighbor. Or maybe I just need to look at my neighbor. Start from the smallest thing I could possibly do. Looking at my neighbor means I face them. Facing them means I turn my attention to the reality that is my neighbor. And that gives you more than enough to do. Trust me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Preach. Do a whole sermon on that, because honestly, people, what they need to realize when it comes to changing your life, motivation doesn't exist. It's a lie. There's no such thing as motivation. The feeling that you're thinking is motivation, that impulsive, sporadic energy to do a thing randomly that sometimes happens once in a blue moon, that's just a random hit of like dopamine or some shit, and that is not motivation. And that is not what you need. What you need is to know what you need to do. So let's say you want to write a book. In order to write a book, you need a chair, a table, blank paper, and a writing apparatus. And you need to sit down and look at the page. You don't need to write 100 pages. You don't need to create characters. You don't need to create plot. You don't need to create setting. You don't need to change your hairstyle or get the right grip or eat a good meal. You just need to sit down and look at the thing or the tool that you will use eventually to do the thing and breathe.
Yeah, like Tim Ferriss says,
Now
just 2 terrible pages a day. 2 terrible pages a day, and you're good. You're doing
Let's continue
something.
to parallel this with Moses's arc. All right. So he's been given one of the 7. It doesn't say it's a reward, but it just happened in the course of time. Living with them, mating to their culture, and he was only invited because he had something to offer. And it's not like he had something to offer. He was someone of value. But he wasn't someone of value that he programmed himself to be. He just saw something, to your point, Will, faced it, and acted. 7 people, they could be taken advantage of. They have water. They have a bucket. There's like 3 things that can be done. I'll start doing the first. Oh, and they have some stories they're going to tell me while I'm drawing up water. Hey, that's fun. Maybe they don't. I just get to focus on the bucket all day because they're not saying anything. Either way, the thing got done. And the thing led to the next thing, to the next. Okay, now he's got his wife. He has his child. He remembers, this is kind of a weird place I'm in. So he names the child Stranger in a Strange Land. And then what's so interesting, and this does not work for an evangelical that wants to make everything important in the world subsumable by a tract to hand out. And I'm being tongue-in-cheek when I say that, because I just want to draw attention to this. I'm not like pointing to anyone in particular to make them a scapegoat or caricature them. But tracts, more important than having a tract is what you do with it. To your point. So God didn't just say, "Oh, good, he's got his life in order, his room's clean. Hey, guess what? I'm going to make you famous, Jordan Peterson." No, he made Jordan Peterson lecture for 30 years. Moses become a strong shepherd for however many years. And he didn't intervene. He didn't jump in and execute programs. He didn't even say one thing or the other. That was what Moses faced. What shall we make of that interval now in the course of our discussion?
Like 9 times out of 10 when I'm in a funk and I'm having a hard time finding energy to live my life, it's this existential dread mire that many of us have spent a few days in. I remember that's not how the world works. Like, I need to go for a walk and take a look at a road and remember just how much I'm taking for granted and put myself back in reality. Because if you get stuck in your house, in your bedroom, on your bed, you're now 3 times removed from the rest of reality. And so often that's the cure, is just, oh yeah, mailboxes. What a great system that is. Like, holy cow, thank gosh we have that. And everything seems a little bit easier.
That's that nested system thing. Like you said, God, I never thought of a platonic form as a bed. But you're precisely right. You've got the world, state, smaller, block, smaller, house, address, zip code, now room, now bed. You are in such a refined object that it doesn't even exist. There's no such thing as bed at this point. What you're laying on is not what you're laying on. It's so refined down to comfort. I've never thought of a platonic form that way. I always thought of it as something so sophisticated it disappears. But you brought it down to something so primitive it disappears. I love that.
Yeah, like calling it a bed is about as useful as calling it a collection of molecules and atoms and matter. It's just, that isn't what it is. It's comfort. It's something to lie on. It's something to sleep on.
And this is one of the great things I think that have been nailed into us for worse in the course of, in my case, growing up in America as a millennial. The idea of commodity, solving existential problems. A commodity will never solve your existential problems, such as Dove soap. Like, they seem like they do because at root, they solve a need. So, for example, the body's worn out. It needs to lie down and just do nothing for a period. You can do that on the grass. You can do that on a rock. It doesn't matter. What matters is what you allow the body to do. Now, someone comes along and says, capitalize on that. How can I make it so appetizing so that after the interval is up and they can now get up and do things? How can I entice them to lay back down and become dependent on this thing that has replaced the physiological interval? That's called a bed. That's what a bed is. It's this commodity that doesn't exist naturally in nature. Nature never thought it up. Just think about this. When God created everything, according to Genesis chapter 1, he didn't make beds. He didn't make any commodities. No commodities.
And that's
platonic forms.
So I think, like, in a lot of Eastern philosophies, beds are bad. And the higher your bed and the softer your bed, the more removed from reality you are, and the more bad voodoo is just ingrained in it. I have a very large bed and very high off the ground, and it is very comfortable. So I have a lot of problems when it comes to getting out of my bed because it's 42 square feet. But that's the thing. And I read a short story and I recommended all the time. The machine stops. And in this environment that he's created, you have individuals in rooms on beds. And they push a button and a screen comes out and they can call their friend and they can see their friend, and they push a button, they get food, and they push a button, they get water, and they push a button, they get mail, and they never have to leave their room, and they're constantly consuming. And it's the epitome of consumer society. And it's very close in parallel to life that I live far too many days of the year. Because we're at this point now where you can order things with Amazon Prime. My friend delivers pizza, and he'll do deliveries to people for 2 liters of pop. Because they don't want to walk to the convenience store. So they order a pizza, they pay $6 in delivery, and $2 for a bottle of pop. And it's that shutting you down and getting you into that hypnotic state where you're in the delta wavelength, where it's easy to fall asleep, lose a couple hours, and wake up. Because what happens is you fall asleep, and before you fall asleep, you had cravings, and you've addressed those cravings by consuming candy or smoking or drinking, and then you fall asleep. What happens is you go through this unconscious withdrawal, And when you wake up, your cravings come back and surge back up. And now you go out and you spend more money. And then you lie down and you have your things and you watch television. And it's the perfect spot. And then maybe when you finally get sick of that, you go on Facebook and someone pisses you off. And then you see an advertisement for a thing that you deserve. And then you buy that thing. And then you go back.
Once they piss you off on Facebook, you immediately kill them in the form of a bad comment, a poison remark, which is exactly what Moses did. And you cancel them, which is exactly what Moses did. He canceled the Egyptian that he just saw. He just saw after who knows what he was doing in the Egyptian culture, whipping a brother, whipping an identity proxy, whipping this avatar. And I love what you said about money, because it brings us full circle to when Scott sneezed, you said, bless you. You made that moment of functional significance. So too, when someone has a craving, now it's time to satisfy, sneeze. Those are analogous right now in this argument I'm making. The culture that has been pre-programmed around us immediately, reflexively says, bless you. I mean, go spend money. You got a solution to that. It's this piece of paper that in no context does it have value. There's no gold behind our dollar bills. It's fiat. It belongs nowhere. It is actually
a contract.
And it's not, truly, I mean, it's not even a good contract, because it goes up, like the Fed at any moment, our federal government in the United States can artificially raise its value or decrease it. There's no deal. Like, there's nothing standard about it, which is just like saying bless you to Scott sneezing doesn't do anything. It's not a contract, but they're together. And so cash and cravings are artificially together now until people wake up out of the matrix.
What was crazy for me was a few years ago when I was on my journey trying to figure out what it was that they were going to tell me when I got that they never told me. Become a man without religion and without any sort of group, you know, and I took the wrong route, probably drugs and alcohol and lots of friends and partying, but I got here. But one of the big things, and it's so funny because it's such a small thing that sunk in for me, was when we were camping and we'd finished making breakfast and we'd fried some meat in a frying pan and we'd made some eggs and pancakes and grease in the frying pan, and there was ash in the fire pit. And I took the ash and I put it in the pan and I mixed it with leaves from a branch and made soap and cleaned that pan better than I'd cleaned a pan in the past 2 years. And I didn't spend any money on soap because soap is not real. It is
Soap is not real. God, that's a meme, man. That's a meme.
It's Fight Club.
Soap is not real.
And it was like, oh man. It's like, so all of these things, like everything that we consume is snake oil. We're being sold milk in a bag or a jug, and we're being sold carbs in a box and beans in a can.
And we're being sold motivation in a 12-step program.
Yeah.
Like it goes hand in glove. Because everything's so artificial, your motivation has to be artificially developed. Otherwise, you would leave. You would leave the matrix.
Yeah. And lifestyle choices. Oh man. Remember when lifestyle choice became a thing people said?
Yeah.
Like, or it was like I was 6 years old, and it was like, oh, that's a weird lifestyle choice. And it's like, now this is a thing, and people have choice over their lifestyle. And if you don't like your lifestyle, you can just change it. Ghost all of your friends, change towns, become a new person.
Yeah, I remember when gaining 300 pounds was a mistake and not a lifestyle choice.
Yeah, and it's one of these things where it's just a label of a label of a label, and the notion that you can take a hat off, put another hat on, and it's actually the emperor's hat, and there is no hat, but you're saying you're wearing a hat, and it's your new hat, and oh my, it's just so abstracted, like we've been saying, and so obscure and vague that it leaves you with existential dread, anxiety, depression, suicide, mental health disorder, addiction. It's not good. Throwing out the Bible was not a good call. I don't think that using the Bible is the best call, but I think we should probably have some sort of framework because we're humans, and the frameworks that were built were based on the belief that humans need frameworks.
Speaking of frameworks, I got to go in about 20 minutes, but I feel like a perfect segue and near end for us, Will, would be to, because I think we should take the rest of Exodus up next Sunday. Maybe somewhere where we can round our edge is his encounter with and conversation towards the bush that was not consumed by the fire, the lead on every leaf. Because here he is. I mean, he's Bear Grylls. I mean, he's got the sheep. He has to shear them. He has to figure out. Like, he got cut, I'm sure, multiple times out in the field. He's got to figure out how to heal that. Can't go to the magician on the corner block of Egypt. There's no pharmakia. Like he's got to. There's no overarching narrative that will tell him how to be a good shepherd. Every shepherd has to. This is very important. Every self-respecting shepherd has to figure out what being a shepherd will look like in their context. If you have 5 shepherds together, it means 4 of them aren't doing their job.
Yeah.
So a shepherd is, I think, a prototypical existential hero. They didn't have the word existence back then. They didn't have intellectual back then. They had magician. What's the opposite of magician who has no artificial construct? A shepherd. An existing individual who's got to figure out what soap really is, like a true scientist, by taking up the ash at hand, by taking up some leaves around. In other words, treating the world as Genesis 1, where God just said all these stuff are here and they're good. What if I really believed that? Well, then I would discover what soap is. I wouldn't need to go and buy it because it's already implicit in the matter. Okay, that's exactly what a shepherd does.
And the more we discuss this, the more I realize like how many stories are so much more than the story I thought they were. Like the alchemist, we were talking about it earlier. The man's like, a shepherd.
Every word you just said reminded me of The Alchemist, Matt. Straight up.
The man went on a hero's journey. The man met the king of Salem?
Yeah, as the king of Salem. Melchizedek, something like that.
And he got the stones that helped him make the decisions and find his answers in life and learn to read the omens of the world. And these stories that we think are new stories are never new stories. But I think what's interesting reading the Old Testament is just how much we don't take out of the Old Testament and broadcast, because every good Christian boy knows about Moses and the Ark, but they don't know how to make a menorah. And that's right there. And then you go into the tabernacle and the Ark of the Covenant and the mercy seat. And it's so important they go through the delivery of the instructions and then the execution of the very same instructions. And if IKEA put that much detail in the instructions they gave you, we would have a lot more built chairs that were not breaking, but that's another thing.
That's an excellent contradistinction. IKEA and the blueprint of the temple. Love it.
Not only does it have the detail of how to build all these things, but also the detail of them actually building it, which is basically just a copy paste. Oh yeah, this is what he said. Copy paste. That's what they're doing now. And that's the last 5 chapters of Exodus.
And it's crazy because, like, this is all new area for me. This is a completely new landscape. And I was ignorant to the fact that the first 5 books are the Torah and that all of these things are in there. And it's just like, how is it that I can get this far in life without having read these stories? Because they're not changing what I look like in the mirror. They're not going to change the way mustard tastes. But they are informative. They're expansive. They change the content of your mind. And I don't think it's a negative thing to do that. And when you have something that lasts that long, it's been distilled so much that it's probably pretty potent. It's probably pretty painful, but it's going to affect you.
Yeah, like I said before we started recording, like our literature and our mythology is the fossil record of the human mind.
Yes, then that's a great line.
Let me say this to that because it ties in rhetorically. The moment you build an artificial construct, you have to rely on atomic structures. Everything has to be parsable and able to exist in isolation. That's very important. Because then once you can abstract from something, its ensemble cast, you can get it alone. And once you've got it alone, you can change what it thinks it is in relationship to other things. So it's as arbitrary as, now you're isolated, let me sell you ketchup on a stick. You didn't think you needed ketchup on a stick. Well, you're alone. Let that sink in. Oh God, I'm alone. Now, sleight of hand. Here's a ketchup on a stick offered from a human hand and someone looking you in the eye. I like ketchup on a stick because you've triggered them Pavlovian with all the things they need because they're alone. It has nothing to do with ketchup dripping from a stick. That's exactly the logic of consumer-driven advertisement. Now, that works, though, in the way education is brought forward. I'm going to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but I'm not. Take my word for it. The Hebrew poetry has in it this style, which you see throughout the Torah. The narrative mode of Genesis and Exodus, but most strikingly in the Psalms. You see it in the Psalms very clearly. It's called parallelism. Now, it works by line A says something. I understand that. I don't need that repeated. Line B says the same thing. Why did they repeat it? In different words. To show you that the same thing can have a different sense. And it's important to know that and to have that so close together and to repeat that program so that you never cling to appearance. You never cling to one form or take one side to a story. Always believe, almost in a neurotic way, is important, that there's sense in everything. I just don't know it yet. The world is way more meaningful than I give it credit for. There is way more to that ash than ash. Because there's ash line A and ash line B, which is soap. That's Hebrew parallelism. That's the Hebrew mind. But in an artificial world, no, ash is ash. Soap is soap. Get the picture? Now they can sell you soap, and they can sell you someone who will offer you the service of sweeping away your ash. You've just given up your soul twice. You put in extra hours in your work week. It's real. It really matters. So, all that to say, when they give you the blueprint of the temple, then they tell you how to build the temple. Then they give you the third line of they actually went and built the temple. That's Hebrew parallelism. To show you there's a sense in everything. God just doesn't give you a logos, a logic. He gives you a hardware. And he doesn't just give you a hardware and a code. He gives a user. And those three things are different senses of the same thing that cannot be isolated from each other without harm.
Yeah, and
Really
think how different it would be if it just said, like, chapter 16, oh, and they finished building everything God told them to build. The end. We're on to Leviticus.
Now, the other thing, too, as well, just to speak to the repetition, and if I'm not mistaken, like, there's young Jewish children memorizing the entire Torah all over the world, right? So when you write a thing that ought to be remembered, it is in your best interest to repeat yourself in multiple ways, because there's three really good ways to let something sink into your brain. The first way is anything you think to yourself, your brain at a subconscious level believes as the word of God. So when you think to yourself, I'm a failure, your subconscious mind says, okay, got it, and it runs with that at a subconscious level. So that's terrible, and you should be aware of that. The second way to get something into your subconscious brain is to receive information from someone you trust and respect that has taken the time to get into rapport. We're in rapport. If I give you a piece of information right now, there's a very high chance that you'll remember it. The third way, regardless of respect, is through repetition. So the minute you start repeating yourself, and the better you do it, the more abstract you make the repetition. So you change the words, context remains the same, and you completely restructure that sentence so that it looks different, but it's making that same point. That's how you sneak in beyond the critical faculty and let the subconscious mind remember. So now when you go through it and you read it the second time, well, we're all going to remember that there are pillars and lots of cloth in the tabernacle.
The sockets are made of silver.
There's lots of brass, and it cost a lot of money. and we'll remember that now because
and
it was
blue
repeated.
and purple and scarlet.
And it was worth $5.5 million. I've got to translate the value of shekels.
So to repeat back to you what you said to me, to hold it in place, we've got real talk, we've got respectability, and then we have repetition.
Yeah, so it's never the ketchup on a stick that sells itself. It's a real nice guy selling you the ketchup on a stick, or it's someone saying ketchup on a stick, ketchup on a stick, ketchup on a stick. Don't you want a ketchup on a stick? And you're like, yeah, I kind of do want a ketchup on a stick.
Like, it's at State Farm, where all of their agents have a name in their commercial. So it's no longer a company. Joey from State Farm. You know Joey. He wears a cardigan and he has a belt. And it's familiarity, because as soon as someone remembers you, like, oh, it's game over for sales.
Yeah, like, I think it's the same effect with religion a lot of the time. It's not the Bible that sells it. It's a Jordan Peterson or a good pastor, or, you know, your family members or something like that, or, you know, the complete repetition of it over and over again when you're going to church. That's why Jehovah's
Witnesses go out.
Yeah.
Right? That's why they go out. Because if you say no to me in the morning, do something, the likelihood that you will say yes to me in the evening is significantly greater than if I hadn't seen you in the morning. Mm-hmm. Now, if I sell your neighbor and then I come and see you, it's over. I've already sold you because I saw you once, and then I sold your neighbor, and you love Steve, and Steve got my service, and now you know me, and you know Steve knows me, so we're all good, and I'm selling you.
Here's a great secret in Psalm 1. It says, "Blessed is the man who meditates on the law day and night." That's a parallelism, because someone who has meditated on the law knows what day and night means, or one's important sense of day and night. Day and night is not some artificial construct of atoms moving about and stars exploding. It's a result of God saying there is night and there is day. So one who meditates on the law day and night is actually not in time as a ticking clock knows it. They've meditated on the word spoken that made reality to such a degree that their calendar is in the Russian doll of the law itself. So they are reading what they're already inside because they've read it so often. They put it inside. It's contained in those two little words that someone who hasn't already made that move would just say, oh, 24-hour day and night. No, it's the day and night from the law itself in the first book of Genesis that it's saying he who meditates on it will do it day and night. In other words, repeating God's words after him. So those two lines is actually giving the rhetorical move away for those who have ears to hear. That's what Jesus meant when he said ears to hear. Those who had eaten, who drank the snake oil, believed it completely, they would hear what he was doing with his stories, because his stories can all be traced back to the law. And so then it finally says in that same psalm, he will be like a tree planted by streams of water. But in the Hebrew, it's not planted, it's transplanted. So that means someone who doesn't take day and night for day and night, but day and night as the words in the law that they've committed to memory, will be able to be uprooted and put anywhere. Because their world is not the world as you and I know it from Microsoft, but it's in the word invisibly told them in their very bones. So put them wherever they will, they'll prosper. And that's exactly the argument of that psalm. And it fits with the Exodus story so well. Wherever Moses went, he prospered.
Just it, because if you actually do the soul searching and you put the work in and you realize or come to the decision of who you are, and you can boil it down to 3 major character traits. You know, maybe you're compassionate, curious, and have a real tendency to be interdependent. You want to collaborate with. If you know that that's who you are, it doesn't matter if you need to fold a flag or make a sandwich or build a bridge. If you have in your heart and your brain the knowledge of who you are, you can attack any problem. And that's the degree to which you will solve that problem, is the degree to which you know you're. And getting to that place gets rid of a lot of anxiety, but I don't think we put enough focus on who we are. And I think we do a lot more focus on what we do. And I think that there's a good scene in Across the Universe where they're saying it's what you do that makes you who you are, and it's who you are that makes you what you do. And I think Jude says, surely it's not what you do, but how you do it. And I think that how you do it is tied intrinsically to who you are, and that who you are is this thing that is a decision for you to make and to remake every day. And that when you realize that, it gives you the opportunity to change your capacity and to be able to live how you want by realizing that who you are has some big factor in how you do what you do, but it's not really what you do that matters.
So think of it as a cinema screen. And on the left side of the cinema screen is the first part of Moses's behavior. He's in Egypt and he becomes curious. So he steps out to the right and sees an Egyptian whipping a person that he identifies with, according to their historical background that he's been taught. That gets him in a lot of trouble. It changes his whole world, in fact. Now he's a refugee runaway. It allowed his personality trait of curiosity and willingness to step out on a limb and see what's going on for his own two eyes transformed him. Now, fast forward the story, Hebrew parallelism at a larger level. He's a shepherd. He has every reason to be content. Something strikes the peripheral vision from his eye, a little spark. He's curious, so he steps to the right, and what does he find? A burning bush. That's normal. Desert bushes catch flame all the time. That's not terrific. But this one, because he's staring at it, he's curious, he notices that the leaves are green. It's not being consumed. What is this? Outlier. And the outlier speaks to him. But the outlier caught his attention because he was and remained a curious person.
Because even if you don't know who you are, you still are. And you'll do things. And so it's in your best interest to find out who you are. And as far as major character traits are concerned, there's not a lot of wiggle room, but there's no wiggle room when you don't know who you are. And when you're in automatic mode and you're in your 6-pack, 9-to-5, 7-day week life, you are who you are.
Boomer sitting on the riding lawnmower. Boom, boom, boom.
And you can say that things happen to you, or you can say that you make things happen for you. And that's just it. That's what got Moses through his journey, was that he was a curious individual. And I think that that's a very empowering trait. Open-mindedness and the willingness to face.
And what I love is God honored it. God didn't knock it out of him. God isn't in this law, the one who wrote the law, he's not a despot. He didn't say, cut out your idiosyncrasy and curiosity. You don't need to know what's behind the curtain in Oz. That's how he got his attention. He was one with the curious outlier in him.
He
spoke to it directly.
There's a lot of people that try to connect the burning bush with ayahuasca or the acacia bush, and just call it a DMT trip. And that kind of makes sense in the strain that we're talking about, because if you've ever done psychedelics, you know that increases your curiosity levels and your introspection levels.
And contentment with being in nature.
Yeah, and not only that, if you ever watch those interviews from people in the Amazon and stuff like that, and they say, how did you figure out how to make ayahuasca? They're just like, well, it comes from these 2 or 3 different plants that we do 2 or 3 different methods of treating them. but the plants themselves taught us how to do it. And that kind of ties in with the story in Exodus that's like, well, the plants might have been teaching them how to build the tabernacle and the Ark of the Covenant. It's just like, oh, this is a good bush.
Because that's the thing, Scott. The plant probably did teach them how to build the tabernacle. I bet if the three of us went out and said, let's build us a tabernacle, you'd figure out real quickly that the way it was built looks gorgeous, and it follows several universal laws of beauty and efficiency and simplicity. And it's not that it needed to be built that way because God said so. It's because it needed to be built that way because that's how it had to be, because it's godly in its own nature, and that's what it looks like. You look at something and your eyes make this distinction and say that's right or that's wrong. And this is something that I talk about with game design too, is like your interface needs to be good enough that people don't notice anything wrong about it. And that's the same with your apps or your assets. So if everything is consistent and nothing jumps out compared to anything else, you accept it as it is. And I think that when you're designing things, that's what happens. Like you go to try and build a dresser and not make something pretty after looking at it once and saying that's ugly and knowing how to rebuild it. It's something that's just inside of us. And when you get high and decide that you want to build a really big shed, it's going to look good if you've got 500,000 men and all of the resources of Egypt to do it.
Yep. And in speaking of resources, he comes to this burning bush and it speaks to him. And what ran through my mind was that ash spoke to you. And yeah, we're not two world theorists where we say God at that moment ordained that the ash would speak to you in an ash way. No, the ash presenting itself to you in such a way that you made the association with, and these two things interacted in your mind, how a relation obtained sufficiently persuasively to make you, and then to have your little theory corroborated. Oh my God. Exactly. Oh my God. That is a Hebrew parallelism of God speaking and the world responding. Like you don't know where the one begins and ends. It's the same. Yeah. That's the law. It's natural law, so to speak. Now, when this law speaks to him, either through his mouth because he's smoking it, or it was just a miracle, it says, take off your commodity. I mean, take off your shoes. Because shoes aren't real. So take off what's not real here and put what's real on top of what's real. Foot on ground. And that means so many different things at once. One thing it removed was the separation, the commodity. And then it further went on to say, here's now your purpose. Now that contact has been made, here's what you're going to go do. Okay, but not me. No. And this, I think, is what actually happens to people when they're confronted with reality. No. That's what we immediately say to reality. Cannot be. Not so. Get me out of here. Where's the proxy? Where's the eyes closed? Like we close our eyes. No. This doesn't cohere. I have a speech impediment. I don't care. You have a brother, don't you? Fine. We'll make these concessions with reality. We'll start to bring it down closer to what you will accept and minimally do. That's exactly how reality works.
Yeah. We like to be comfortable and we don't like to change. Even if you offer us the greatest change in the world, what you're offering us is change. And at a subconscious level, the modality is it's just as clean cut as it gets. And I think that people forget that. And I think that's probably why people self-flagellate in very weird regions. Yep. Because that's one of these things where there's this relationship between pain and growth. And when we allow ourselves to get to a place where we feel we don't deserve to suffer, we're ultimately saying we don't deserve to live.
The image that popped in my head just there was Brave New World. And that's a...
Which part?
Like, I think it's John, like the savage character.
Yeah.
when he talks about, like, he's got a Bible of his own, and he talks about his childhood where he's just whipping himself so he would feel something, and then he comes into the brave new world, and it's like, this isn't right. This isn't how we're supposed to live, guys.
And the change was so stark. He said no.
Yeah. I had a couple arguments with someone about what that book was about, and they were like, "Oh no, the Brave New World's perfect. That's what we should be aiming towards." And it's like,
It's
no.
It's a dystopian.
Didn't you
I
read
need my
it?
Soma sugar. I want my Soma sugar.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I've had Exodus, the song, stuck in my head for a few days now. I'm going to go listen to it. I think that was a good conversation on Exodus. I don't know if we need to dive too much more into it.
Yeah, we can let 7 days pass. It's salient then.
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up, Will. I got to go too.
Yeah.
That was awesome, guys. I know that was awesome.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about Genesis in this one, so we'll probably talk a little bit about Exodus when we go over the third video, which will be Leviticus next week.
Yeah.
So, just remember, folks, soap isn't real. Check out our website, bookwave.club. Got anything to say to us? Any recommendations? Got any complaints? We're too much of a heathen for you. Any closing words?
If you sneeze, think of my voice saying, "Bless you."
Very nice. God bless.